Now wear entire impression. This is evidence that you will find often at crime scenes, and unfortunately, it's often missed. If you come up to a crime scene and it's muddy near the point of entry and there's a big footprint, well, yeah, you're going to say, I got some evidence. But sometimes it's not as obvious, especially if it's indoors and it's a dusty shoe print, because those are hard to see. So it's a kind of evidence that can be overlooked, but it can be very important. So a boot or a shoe can be associated or even disassociated from a crime scene. You can have identification, inclusion, or elimination. Remember, I said sometimes you have the class characteristic, and other times you may even have an individual characteristic. We hope to have an individual characteristic to identify the exact shoe, but even a class characteristic can be helpful. We can find this in snow, soil, countertops, tile floors, doors, wood and vinyl furniture, paper items, and so forth. So let me show you a quick video here. That's just a general video about impression evidence.
Law enforcement investigators are taught that physical evidence is left behind at every crime scene. It is often referred to as the silent witness. Impression evidence occurs when an object or material has retained the characteristics of other objects or materials which have been impressed against them. When documented, collected, and preserved properly, impression evidence has the potential to link someone with a crime scene. This is why systematic observation and analysis is so critical. There are many examples of impression evidence, shoe prints and tire tracks being some of the more common types found at scenes. If a shoe print is found where a crime has been committed, crime scene investigators seal off the area and carefully document the evidence with notes, sketches, photographs, and video. If the shoe print was made in a soft substance, such as mud or dirt, three-dimensional cast can be made using dental stone. All of these steps will help to maintain the integrity of the evidence and allow for a more in-depth examination at the laboratory. When examining a questioned shoe print, a forensic scientist may be able to determine the brand, size, and type of shoe. These are called class characteristics. If the impression is of good quality, randomly acquired characteristics such as wear and defects on the soles caused by cuts, scratches, or rocks wedged into the tread can be used to positively identify the impression to a specific shoe. Because this is a comparative examination, known shoes are necessary for comparison. When known shoes are recovered, impressions are created as a record of the class and randomly acquired characteristics in the tread. These inked impressions and the shoes are then compared to what was collected at the crime scene. Impression evidence can confirm or refute statements from suspects, victims, and witnesses. It's based on a methodical, scientific examination that can provide a factual piece of the crime-solving puzzle.
Now, as far as collecting, in that we saw photographs, we saw the casting, but there's also another thing you can do, and that's called dust lifting. If you have two-dimensional impression. If you have a three-dimensional impression, you're going to want to do casting. Two-dimensional, you're going to do a lifting. So let's look at how we would do, first of all, the photography. With photography, you need to use a tripod, have your film plane parallel, and photograph it. The finished result is going to look something like this with a photograph. You have this L-shaped scale surrounding two sides of the impression. Now, you don't try to get it right up to the edge because the scale is not really there to try to visually show you how long the shoe is or how wide it is. No, the scale is there, so later you can make a life-size photographic print, and then you can measure on the print if you need to with a scale.
For this video, we're going to be demonstrating how to photograph a footwear impression. So we have our scale, and what we're going to do before photographing is we're going to place it around our footwear impression that we found here in the dirt, and you want to leave at least an inch between it and your footwear impression. You don't want to damage anything. We're going to take our tripod and place it directly over the impression, and we'll want to check and make sure that that's going to encompass everything. Once our tripod is in place, we want to find the angle of our footwear impression. So we're going to check it on two sides, because what we want to do is make sure that the camera is at the same angle so that we have a parallel film plane. Lovely. Now that we have this orientated right, we're going to hook up our flash. So when you take photos of your footwear impression, you're going to want to take a total of 6 photos, twice through every leg of the tripod at 2 different angles. Okay, so let's start over here on the right. We're going to start at a lower oblique angle. Hit the button. And then one more time at a higher angle. You're going to cast shadows on your footwear impression. That's going to make it easier for you to view detail. And you'll want to use the best one. Lower angle. And a higher angle. And one more time from this side. Lower angle. And a higher angle. As you can see, by varying the level of the flash, you get varying degrees of detail on your different photographs.
So that's photography. Another way to collect evidence is through casting. Now, I would say that casting is best evidence on a three-dimensional because you get the three-dimensional aspect of it. If you merely photograph an impression, you don't really see the depth. And there also could be something on the edges of your impression that won't show with a photograph taken from straight overhead. If you're going to cast, you should always photograph the impression first, because something may go wrong with the casting. You got the photograph that will serve as a backup. Let's say that you go to a scene and you have a whole lot of impressions. Several things to consider. First of all, you want to rule out any impressions that were done by first responders. So you want to see if you can see the soles of the shoes of other people that have been there and eliminate those, find out where people walked. Then the ones that are likely left behind by the suspect, you want to see how many of those you have and pick out the very best ones. And maybe if you've got 5, cast the 2 best ones that you have, but photograph all 5. Now, on the right-hand side of this image, you see a cast. What we normally use now is dental casting compound or dental stone. It's very hard. It gives great detail, and you can even use it on a minor slope and it won't just roll down the slope. As I said, you could get some detail with a cast on the sides of your impression. Here is one, and you can see it actually says Vans. That's on the side of the shoe. So sometimes that will show. Typically, when you're done, this is the kind of result you get. And this is pretty typical how they end up looking. When you first pull them out of the dirt, they're going to be covered with dirt, but then you let the material harden, then you can scrub it off. You can wash it off and scrub it off.
In this video, we're going to be casting the footwear impression. Always remember that you must photograph your footwear impressions before you cast them. And since that's been done, we're going to go ahead and show you how to cast. Now, depending upon what kind of ground your footwear impression is in, will depend on how you treat the area. So we have some kind of loose, fine dirt here, and we don't want to damage the impression when we pour the casting material on. So we're going to use a hardening spray to kind of set this print. And when you're using this hardening spray, you don't want to spray too close at first because you want to see how it's going to affect with the wind and your surroundings and everything. So you just want to, we've got an angle here. Okay. And now whatever casting material you're using, they usually come pre-measured in a bag. And so we're going to go ahead and mix up, add the water. Make sure you follow the directions on whatever casting material you have. And if it comes in a bag like this pre-measured, you can just go ahead and mix it in the bag. Make sure you get it all the way down into the corners because you're going to want to use all of this casting material. Alright, now that this is fairly well mixed, very well mixed, you may want to make sure there's no lumps in here whatsoever. You can go ahead and remove our scale. Don't want it to be in the way. Now when you pour out your casting material, you never want to pour directly onto your footwear impression. You want to start at one end, and as the material builds, it will flow, and you can direct the flow by continuing to pour on top of the casting material that's already come out. And you're going to want to give yourself a little bit of an overlap here on the outside of maybe 1 to 2 inches surrounding this print. You don't need to open this all the way either. Just start your pour. See how you can kind of guide it to flow without actually pouring directly on this print. Don't be shy, use all of your compound here. Now, we have a tongue depressor that we can use to just lightly smooth and spread this. You can get kind of an even application. Make sure you've covered enough area. And then you're going to let it set for about 30 minutes. You want to make sure that it's, you know, really set before you try to lift it up. And then you're going to, once you've lifted it after okay, about a half an hour has transpired. So now we're going to go ahead and lift up our casting. And it's covered with dirt, as it should be. You don't want to go ahead and brush this off yet. So now what you would do is you would place this in a cardboard box and transport it back to your lab, where you would then let it set for about another 72 hours so it can cure and harden all the way. And then after 72 hours you can go ahead and brush it off, wash it off, so you can look at all the detail. That way you don't compromise any of the detail of your cast. If you were to wash it off now, it might be a little too soon. Now we're rinsing off our cast. Take a little bit, gradually work through all this dirt. Now, to get into some further detail, you could probably use a little brush along with the water to get the rest of this dirt off, but you can already see a good amount of detail here, the tread mark of this footwear impression.
So that's basically how casting is done. And then you would package that in a cardboard box and take it back to your station, let it continue to harden, and then you can go ahead and scrub it clean. You can also cast in the snow. It is possible to cast with dental casting compound, but as the reaction occurs with the casting where it hardens, it creates heat. And so you can actually have less detail when using dental casting compound. The best way by far is to use sulfur. So the way you use sulfur is you have a camp stove and you have a pot. You put some sulfur in the pot, heat it until it becomes a liquid. Once it becomes a liquid and you're stirring it the whole time, you go ahead and pour it into your impression right away. When you pour it into the impression, it's going to turn back into a solid instantly because of the cold snow, and you end up with a very high resolution result. The only problem with just using regular sulfur is it's very brittle. This Cast Pro sulfur stone, it has a hardener built into it. This is what a cast with sulfur stone would look like. And then you make your examination. Another way of collecting footwear impression evidence is with lifting. Now, this would be with two-dimensional, or you have a dusty shoe print. And how do you find a dusty shoe print? Well, usually with oblique lighting. That if you can get light at the correct angle, if there are any dusty shoe prints, you should be able to see them with that technique. Another example. So you can see that they are visible if you take the time to look for them. So let's look at the footwear impression using the electrostatic dust lifter. This is a type of electrostatic dust lifter. There's also a handheld version that's just one unit, but both of them will have a ground, a lead. And what you do is you put this mylar material that is black on one side on top of where you think you have a dusty shoe print. And then you go ahead and turn this on. You have the ground alongside about an inch away, and then you touch the mylar material with the lead, and it creates static electricity, which lifts the dust onto the underside of this metallic material. You also either have a brush or a roller to roll out any bubbles, because there'll be some air bubbles when you do this. And this on the right is the kind of result you get. Right away, you should try photographing it, just in case some of the dust comes off in the transportation process. You go ahead and put it in a flat box like this, tape down the corners, label it this side up, and you carry it that side up, and it goes to the lab or to your evidence room. Another way we can do these lifts is with adhesive or a gelatin lifter. A gelatin material, they're sticky on one side, so they come in a foil package. You have sheets of them. They can be different sizes. You can cut them to the size you want, and then it has a protective film on the sticky side. You peel that off and then you apply it, and as you can see in the picture there, it's just kind of rolled onto whatever surface has the dusty shoe print. And now we'll finish up with tire impressions. A lot of what I've already explained on casting and photographs are about the same, except that you're dealing with a longer piece of evidence. So with photography, what you need to do is take overlapping photographs. So you set your camera on a tripod, you put down a long tape measure as long as the area you're going to photograph. You leave the tape measure alone, but you take your first photograph, pick up the tripod, move it over, set it down. Take your next photograph, pick it up, move it over, set it down with overlapping photographs. And then because the tape has not moved, you can later piece those pictures together. With the casting, you just have to use more material. This is not a good photograph of a tire impression. For tire impressions, you need to have your film plane parallel so there's no distortion. So you would use the same technique we saw with the footprints. This is just showing a tire mark, that's all. So as far as measurements go, we can have the track width, and we can have the wheelbase. So one thing to be aware of, the front track width could be different from the rear track width on a vehicle. Measure between the centers of the two, and now you'll have the track width. And then the wheelbase is from the center of the tire in the front to the center of the tire in the back. And to measure that, if you're measuring a car's wheelbase to compare, you can go ahead and measure from the front of each tire. Let's say that you have the suspect's vehicle. You want to collect evidence as well as do a study to see if the tire tracks match. Well, first of all, you have the tire itself, and you need to describe it in your report. So on the tire, you have things like the size marking, this P215/60R14. That tells you the size of the tire. It's a 215 by 60 radial 14-inch tire is what it is. The other markings here, you would also record. This is, you don't have to record this, but DOT means Department of Transportation. But you record this. This is the manufacturer and plant code. This is a tire size code. These are optional numbers that the manufacturer can put in, so you'd record those. And then there'll be a code here that is the date of manufacture. So you write all of that down for each tire that you're going to be doing this study on. Now, to do this, you need to have at least 3 people to accomplish this. And to get your sample to make your comparison to, you need to have some Vaseline or clear kiwi shoe polish, some material to make your transfer onto. You're also going to need black magnetic fingerprint powder and a marker. So you're going to write down the information that we have from the tire, also which tire on the car it is it the right front, rear left, whatever. You're going to indicate which is the inside of the tire and which is the outside of the tire, and the direction of travel while you're doing this. Okay, so how do we do it? On these tires, they have wear bars. And that's a way you can keep track of a full circumference of the tire and keep track of portions of the tire as you're doing this. As far as locating those from the side of the tire, there'll be a little triangle on the sidewall of the tire. And so then what you do is you go ahead and you can take a railroad marker, which is like a crayon, and mark where those are and number them. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 where the bars are. Then you're going to record that on the material that you're rolling on. And what I actually like to use is a clear acetate instead of butcher paper or some other kind of paper, because the clear acetate then can be placed over your cast or over a photograph to help the criminalist make a comparison instead of having to hold it side by side. Now, if you have side by side, you can actually rephotograph something to make a transparency. But it's just easier, I think, to start with a piece of acetate or clear plastic to make your impression on. Now, one thing you have to be careful about is the tire slipping, because you're going to make the tire slippery by putting Vaseline or clear kiwi shoe polish on it. So here's what you do. You have somebody put the car in neutral and steer. You do not drive the car because you don't want any slippage. Instead, you're going to have somebody else push the car slowly. And the third person is going to have the Vaseline on their glove and allow the glove against the tread to evenly put a coating of Vaseline on the tread, so that as the tire goes, it's going to leave behind a sticky impression of Vaseline or this shoe polish. Once you've done this with all 4 wheels, then what you do is you break out the magnetic powder. Now, the reason I say magnetic powder is with magnetic powder, you have the applicator, which has a magnet in it, and you actually pick up a clump of powder that has metal shavings in it. And so you pick up a clump of the powder and then you can drag the powder across your Vaseline. That way you're not going to ruin a feather duster or a brush. So you use the magnetic powder. So here we have some students doing this as an exercise, and they're just doing it on butcher paper, but here they are dusting that to make it visible. Once you've made it visible, here you see how they have put the markings to show this is 6 here, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in the rotations. They've also noted the type tire and all that, which one it is, and the direction it rolled. Now you have that, and the criminalist can look at your photographs and or your cast and try to make a comparison.